On Friday, I visited the tea room at tea time and made myself a cup of coffee. When I got there, no one was drinking tea and coffee, but they were listening to motivational clips. Man does not live on bread alone came to mind. So, philosophy is important, as demonstrated by staff listening to the clips in the tea room. And I'd argue philosophy and theology are important because we need a way of thinking about good and evil, suffering and flourishing. I was fortunate enough to have a father growing up, and I could stop there and that would be just the most incredible story. Partly because we live in a country where almost 2/3 of children grow up in households without fathers. So I grew up with a father, and I was fortunate enough to have a father who read regularly and widely nursery rhymes, psychology, theology, and importantly, read the Bible daily. So this week we read Acts chapter 8. Philip heard an Ethiopian eunuch reading from the book of Isaiah, chapter 53, which is the chapter about Jesus' suffering and execution. Philip asked the Ethiopian if he understood what he was reading, and the Ethiopian responded, "How can I understand if no one teaches me?" So there are a few things that jump out. And first, obviously, is that we need a teacher. The second thing that jumps out is the connection between a eunuch and a man who had been cut off from the land of the living, speaking, obviously, about Jesus. One duty that eunuchs commonly had was to take care of women in wealthy households, and supposedly using their physical strength and reducing the problem of sexual attraction. Another thing that jumped out was that this man was reading Isaiah 53, a prophecy about Jesus' suffering. Now, some of the most well-known psychological literature is about human suffering. Suffering, especially when we ourselves are experiencing it, draws our attention like nothing else can. Solzhenitsyn and Frankl both wrote about the atrocities in the Second World War at the hands of the Russian and German authorities. Having a philosophy, a theology, helps to navigate in the world because it gives an internal representation of what we might encounter. It's important to expose children to stories that build their internal representation so that they can make sense of the world. This is especially important when we consider that they are going to inevitably deal with suffering, intentional malice, and evil. These experiences can have a range of responses. So, mostly people experience what's called post-traumatic growth. Most people, to varying degrees, recover from trauma and make sense of, to varying degrees, the experience. Some have a harder time of it, and they have a harder time developing a sense and deriving strength out of the experience. So psychologists, as I said, have devoted a great deal of time and energy investigating trauma and recovery. Some of the most notable works for exploring psychology are about concentration camp survivors. Psychologists are interested in what they can learn from those who have survived extreme conditions, intentional malice, miscarriages of justice, evil. People are changed by these experiences along a continuum, sometimes seemingly irreparably damaged and dysfunctional. And sometimes strength, fortitude, beauty, generosity, kindness, goodness, union grow out of these experiences. I remember a poem that I read many years back, and this is one of the lines: "For nothing is soul or whole that has not been rent." That's from Crazy Jane by Yeats. So it's debatable how right a relationship can be made once it's fallen apart. And I'd argue that restitution can be redeeming and can create something better than before. It creates something better than what was before because the process can bring about the very best of us: forgiveness, humility, kindness, sacrifice, and generosity. Father, I pray that you would lead us into greater communion.